we have to accept that there's going to be some level of degradation of those enzymes through the conditioning and pelleting process. It's pretty unavoidable if we want to be at high enough temperatures where we're effectively killing pathogens and we're getting a good pellet quality. So you kind of have to accept that there's a trade-off there. And if you can map out, I'm going to lose this percentage of my enzyme, you can potentially increase the inclusion a little bit, but you have to be careful with that on the monetary side. And then looking at, so we know that using these higher temperatures is obviously going to ultimately have a negative impact on bird performance and digestibility of nutrients. But I'm trying to look at, go through the data and look at including these carbohydrates, including a xylanase on its own or a carbohydrates blend. What the data would suggest is that we're able to push that temperature a little bit higher and maintain performance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the today's episode of the Phytase podcast show. And I have a very special guest and one of our former student, Tanner Weiss. How are you doing, Tanner?
I'm doing really well. How are you, Dr. Pacheco?
Good. It's good having you here. And could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
Sure. My name's Tanner Weiss. I am a PhD candidate at Purdue University in the Animal Sciences Department. I'm currently working with Dr. Adiola on monogastric nutrition. I got my undergraduate degree at Purdue in 2018 in animal sciences, and then came down to Auburn with you guys and got a master's degree in poultry science with Bill Dozier, focusing primarily on amino acid nutrition research. And my thesis there revolved around isoleucine requirements on an ideal protein level with lysine, and then finished there in 2020 and came back up to Purdue and started working with Dr. Adiola. I've done a pretty wide range of research, but my dissertation topic is revolving around the use of exogenous enzymes to increase nutrient digestibility for both broiler chickens and growing pigs.
Evonik Animal Nutrition is committed to ensure food security and safety while reducing the ecological footprint of animal farming. Its products and services use evidence-based solutions that seek to promote animal welfare and reduce reliance on natural resources. All this is underpinned by long-standing industry partnerships and deep customer understanding. Evonik's focus on efficiency, sustainable, healthy nutrition, and collaborations with livestock farming partners creates value for customers and consumers.
Excellent. And what do you think that is the potential, of these enzymes? Because when we look, especially like soybean meal, and we compare, gross energy against metabolizable energy, the birds can only get less than 60% of that energy. What do you see? Do you think like all these enzymes in the future are going to start getting better and better, just to increase the digestibility of the nutrients?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at just the technology of enzymes has increased exponentially over the last 2 decades. And if you look at something like Phytase, it's gone from being used in some smaller percentage of diets to at this point now, especially in the United States and in Europe, you're going to be really hard pressed to find diets being fed to monogastric animals that are not using a Phytase at some level. When we talk about soybean meal specifically, you're going to have the obvious problems with soybean meal that are going to be associated with it, with the potential to have some anti-nutrient properties there with trypsin inhibitors. We're mostly taking care of that with the heat treatment, but there's also going to be a number of non-starch polysaccharides and oligosaccharides that are partially available to the animal, but oftentimes we're going to be passing those on to the hindgut, which we want to try and minimize as much as possible. So Phytase can play a role in that when you're breaking down those phytic acid molecules in the gut. You're going to open up that superstructure and allow more endogenous digestion. But there's a lot of other enzymes on the market, primarily talking about carbohydrates. So there's really general carbohydrates. You can look at things like cellulase that are just trying to break down those glucose to glucose bonds. But when you get over into the hemicellulose lane, there's all of these different molecules that are partially available, but when they're not degraded, they make up that superstructure as well, and can increase viscosity and can decrease overall digestibility, not just of energy, but of a lot of other things in the diet. So breaking that apart using more specific carbohydrates, things like xylanases, beta glucanases, mannanase perhaps. There's a lot of options on the market right now, but that can really open up what you're getting from that soybean meal and make those nutrients more available.
Yeah, and I think, you have done some or a lot of research with phytase, right? And do you see like additional improvements, not only like, in phosphorus release, but also like in energy and an amino acid that, the industry can take advantage of those additional benefits?
Yeah, so I don't have data right now that's suggesting significant energy release. We've got some work that's not done yet that we might have some data on that. But amino acids in particular, we know with broilers, phytase is going to increase both the apparent and standardized digestibility of amino acids. And there's a lot of data on that for broilers. I presented some data over the last summer on that, and we're working on publishing that. But when you turn your attention to pigs, it's always been understood that, yeah, we're going to get some improvement probably with pigs because the action going on in the gut with what that phytase is doing, liberating the amino acids that are bound to phytate, that's going to be happening in pigs as well. But the data hasn't been there necessarily to support that on a very strong basis. And that, I think that's starting to change where in pigs at multiple age classes, if you look in the literature now, there's some data suggesting that phytase is becoming more consistent. The newer age phytases are being more consistent at increasing that amino acid availability, and that's a real benefit, because if you start thinking about matrix values, obviously we know what these phytases are doing with phosphorus and calcium in particular, but there's the way I've seen it, there's a lot of nutritionists who kind of hold back at assigning matrix values for other things. We know, like I said, we know it's releasing amino acids. We know it's releasing energy, very much so in broilers. On the other side with pigs, it's a little less known, obviously. But talk about broilers, getting stronger data to say we're going to consistently get this minimum we feel comfortable with of amino acids so that we can appropriately discount those diets and potentially move forward with what we're doing in enzymes. And that's going to be something that it takes a ton of data to feel comfortable with saying, I'm going to discount my diet some percentage in protein and amino acids because I really believe in this enzyme.
Yeah, and do you think like, because I see like sometimes when we use enzymes like phytase, and we are talking about phytase right now, we see some improvements in feed conversion ratio. And do you think that those improvements are mainly because we sometimes are not giving like the right amount of release of energy and amino acid for that enzyme? So like the nutritionist, I lose some money in the formulation, but they can get some money back on improvements in feed conversions in the field.
I think that's very, very much potentially true. If you look at, for example, there's some people suggesting maybe between 35 and 50 kcals at 1,000 FTU. And if you're not accounting for that and you're upping that energy, you're pretty likely to see a slight decrease in feed intake with similar performance. So, and obviously that would lead to improved efficiency. There are people have other ideas about what potentially can be driving that feed conversion by driving feed intake. And there's been research looking at the potential of inositol having effects. And there's not, those studies have not been terribly conclusive, but there has been some data that suggests that probably more work needs to go there to see, are we doing something? Is that inositol having some effect at the brain level, at the hypothalamus level, driving those birds to eat more? And if we have well-balanced diets to a certain level, if we're driving those birds to eat more, they're going to perform better.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, Tanner, when you have done like this research with Phytase, how much improvement have you seen in amino acid digestibility?
So on an SID basis, we've seen for broilers, I believe the average from the study that we're publishing now was between 3.5% and 4.5% on an SID basis. And obviously that's one case in particular. Callison has published some good meta-analyses on amino acid release where he was looking at closer to 2% more consistently across the board. But particular amino acids, when you're talking about broilers, are going to be more effective. And that's those amino acids that are related to secretory mucins in the gut. Things like threonine especially are going to be affected to a greater amount than they would be without that phytase, because phytase is clearly in broilers having an effect on those endogenous secretions and endogenous losses as a whole. There's quite a bit of data on that at this point where we know that phytase is going to reduce that endogenous loss.
Excellent. And well, you mentioned that you have been also working with another exogenous enzymes, and what have you seen there, like on particularly how many kcals per kilograms will these enzymes help to release?
So we're working specifically with soybean meal on a couple of carbohydrate blends, and we got pretty variable results. But so the average we actually got was close to 200 kcals per kilogram with soybean meal, and I think in a realistic sense that's definitely high. We had fairly variable data. We did get significant results, even with that variation, because we had pretty good power in those studies. But I think more realistically, you're going to be down around where you've seen carbohydrates in complete diets. So xylanase, most of the time we're counting at 2,000 units, we're counting xylanase for around 50 kcals of energy. Soybean meal has the potential to be higher than that because there's a lot of currently indigestible energy. So I think the potential to be higher than 50, looking only at soybean meal, is there. But when you're looking in a complete diet, you have to be careful and just focusing on what you're getting from that soybean meal, because obviously you're going to have, in the United States, you're going to have corn primarily, or potential to have distillers grains or some kind of animal byproducts in there. So you're not going to get the same value you're getting for soybean meal. So I wouldn't want to say a specific number, but I do think looking at soybean meal with those really well balanced blends, you have the potential to be doing pretty well at an energy release.
And have you seen like any effect of the age of the birds or the type of soybean meal that you're using? I don't know if you have used like soybean meals with, like 44% crude protein, which will have higher fiber, versus like a 47%, which is going to have a lower fiber. Does that have an effect?
Yeah, so we've been looking at a relatively standard fiber soybean meal. We, if I remember correctly, the soybean meal we used in those carbohydrates blend studies were just under 47%, which is pretty normal for the soybean meal we get here in Central Indiana. When we will do proximate analysis, that's pretty normal for us. We rarely get up to that 47.5% that textbooks say that dehulled soybean meal should have. And so in terms of looking at different kinds of soybean meal, we haven't done that. I have not done any research myself on effective age, but we know that there is an effective age with a lot of enzymes, where oftentimes those younger birds are going to be more sensitive to it. But there's also data suggesting while they're less sensitive, enzymes can have a greater relative effect in older birds, whether because they have an increased an increased total feed intake, or because that feed intake is a smaller percentage relative to their body weight. I don't know what that cause would be, but there definitely is an effective age. And that makes logical sense, because we know that there's an effective age on digestibility on its own. So if you're looking at how these enzymes are affecting digestibility, there's going to be a clear effective age. But it's something that I don't think can be said definitively that exactly how you would affect that change.
And just out of curiosity, have you done any research with xylanases too? With wheat, soybean meal-based diets.
So yeah, the study that we haven't finished all of the lab work on yet. I can't speak to super specifically, but we were looking at more of a European style diet using xylanase and beta glucanase with and without phytase. So we've got some interesting results with that, and we're essentially trying to quantify the effects in those combinations. Which it's kind of a hard thing to do. And I think that's why there's some really good research out there looking at what would be the XAP, the xylanase, amylase, protease enzyme combinations, and those being combined with phytase are on their own. And there's some really good data on that. So obviously we're looking at a different set of relationships and a different type of diet. And so we're going to see if we can look at how those relationships are affecting a host of things. We're looking at digestibility of nutrients kind of across the board. We're looking at how it affected pH and viscosity. And hopefully we're going to be presenting quite a bit of that data at IPSF next year, potentially PSA in the following summer.
Excellent.
So, there's still some work left to be done on that study, but hopefully we're going to see that. And I think while we're talking about enzyme combinations, I think we have to be really intentional as researchers to make sure that we are designing our studies so that we can appropriately evaluate these relationships between enzymes. I think it's really important to either use a factorial design where you are intentionally using those those enzymes all on their own and then building up those combinations. And that's been done really well with those XAP combinations. There's good data on that. But in terms of other carbohydrates together, most of the time the studies you see are where we're using this commercially available blend and we get an effect, but it's hard to say what that effect is coming from, especially if they contain a protease or are paired with a phytase. It's very difficult to see what exactly is happening in those diets. And that's information we need to be able to appropriately evaluate these enzymes.
That's a really good point, Tanner. I was gonna ask you from the feed milling perspective, what do you think that mill managers can do, or how can they analyze the stability of the enzymes under commercial conditions?
Yeah. Obviously, enzymes are becoming more heat stable. Phytase has been improved greatly. There are heat stable xylanases, and it's actually I'm giving a seminar next week in the department, and I'm talking about the relationship of conditioning temperature and carbohydrates. And essentially, we have to accept that there's going to be some level of degradation of those enzymes through the conditioning and pelleting process. It's pretty unavoidable if we want to be at high enough temperatures where we're effectively killing pathogens and we're getting a good pellet quality. So you kind of have to accept that there's a trade-off there. And if you can map out, I'm going to lose this percentage of my enzyme, you can potentially increase the inclusion a little bit, but you have to be careful with that on the monetary side. And then so we know that using these higher temperatures is obviously going to ultimately have a negative impact on bird performance and digestibility of nutrients. But I'm trying to look at, go through the data and look at including these carbohydrates, including a xylanase on its own or a carbohydrates blend. What the data would suggest is that we're able to push that temperature a little bit higher and maintain performance. So push past that 70 to 76 degrees Celsius up closer to 80, where we really see that jump in pellet quality. But we're still maintaining pretty good performance, and more work needs to be done on that. I think the most recent work I've found on that was from 2020, 2021. So I think that's an area we need to continue to look at because feed is obviously very, very expensive. and we want to be getting the most out of it we can. So looking at the potential of those trade-offs, I think, is really important.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, I agree with you. Like, because we do like stability trials here in Auburn, and we see, the enzymes are just becoming more stable. And when you go to look the feed mills in the U.S., you're gonna see like typically they are going to 190 Fahrenheit, so about like 88 Celsius degrees, and they get like a good recovery of the enzymes. But what I have seen too is that in the U.S. is the feed mills are gonna use less compression ratios in the pellet dyes, and I see like you can lose some enzymes by like the frictional heat producing the pellet dye. So it's really interesting because sometimes when you increase the conditioning temperature, also you add more moisture, so you reduce the frictional heat. So you can. I have the feeling that by increasing temperature, you can lose less enzymes. But like you're saying, it's important to evaluate. That way, you can account for those losses.
Yeah, and with the enzymes we have now, they're very clearly getting better in terms of their heat stability. But there also has to be a realization that if you're including these in a pelleted diet, you're going to lose some, and you need to be aware of that and account for that in your formulations.
Yeah.
It's time for our famous 3.
Well, has been a really nice talk. I have learned a lot, Tanner, and I think like just before we end, I always like to get some of the advice. What kind of advice could you give? Like, you are at the end of the PhD. What kind of advice would you give like to those students that listen to this podcast and then they are just in the first semester of their master program?
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, when I was starting my master's, I thought there was no way I was going to go on to do a PhD. I was pretty burnt out on school, and graduate classes are hard, and that's just a reality. But what I would say is hold on and get into the research, get into what you're interested in, because by the time I was through my first year, my mind had completely changed. I realized that I really enjoyed doing research. I loved nutrition. And I wanted to keep pursuing it because I knew what I wanted to do, and I needed that PhD to get there. And so, I mean, I don't think anybody would lie to you and tell you that graduate school is an easy ride, and it's not difficult and frustrating. But you just have to remember that you chose to do this because it's something that you're passionate about. And if you're not passionate about it, that would obviously be different. But you have to keep that in mind and realize that you're working towards the ultimate goal of being able to have the job you want to have and do something that you enjoy with your life and are hopefully passionate about.
Yeah, and what about like because when I go and I see you like during the meetings and you present, I always enjoy your presentations, and I don't know. I think you have improved a lot the like the presentation styles, and would you also advise them to present as much as they can in these meetings?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has really helped me improve is I've been asked to do some guest lecturing in nutrition classes in our department, so I've gotten much more comfortable doing that. I just got done doing 3 lectures for a class in our department. And I at this point, I'm feeling very comfortable with that. And so, yeah, present as much as you can. And I try and think of it as even though I try and think of the presentations as conversational, even though nobody's going to be talking back to you while you're presenting at a meeting. You almost want to think about it as if they could be, where you're discussing these topics in a way that you would be discussing it sitting with the colleagues in your lab, where you're talking about it in a way that makes sense and is interesting. And so that's kind of the mindset I've had going into it. I think that's helped me some. And then practicing a lot. I practice less now than I used to because I've become more comfortable, but practice as much as you can and make sure you're comfortable with the presentation. You don't want to memorize it because you'll be able to tell it's memorized and it won't come off as authentically. But you want to know what what your material is and practice that and feel really confident, because that'll help when you get up in front of a big room full of people. If you really nail those first couple slides exactly the way you wanted to, that's going to give you really good confidence going down the rest of the presentation.
Excellent. And my last question, I know that you are graduating May 2024. What are you planning to do? Are you planning to go to academia, allied industry, or work with an integrator?
So I think I want to work in allied industry. I would like to keep research as some part of my job, but I think I really want to work with producers. So I think I would really enjoy doing technical service, getting to work with producers and problem solve, but still potentially have that research side of the job, getting to work with universities and solving problems on that end as well. So that's what I'm looking for. I think that's what I'm going to enjoy and really be successful at. And so, yeah, at this point, that's my plan.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Tanner. It's good seeing you. And, I hope to see you around probably like in IPP next year.
Yep. It was good to talk to you, Dr. Pacheco.
Thank you. Take care.